Hello, everyone. Welcome to Flying Minds. My name is Stefan, and I'll be your captain on today's journey. For those aviators that have been in the western region around the Calgary area, you've probably heard of or have had an aviation medical with my next guest. Today's episode, I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Brendan Adams. He's a distinguished medical professional whose remarkable career spans family medicine, aerospace physiology, occupational health, and addiction medicine. With a foundation built on a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science from the University of Toronto, followed by his MD at the University of Calgary in 1981. Dr. Adams' academic journey is nothing short of impressive. He completed his family medicine residency at Calgary General Hospital and holds certifications from the American Board of Aerospace Physiology, the American Board of Addictions Medicine, and the Canadian College of Family Physicians, among others. Dr. Adams has been a clinical assistant professor at the University of Calgary's Department of Family Medicine since 1990, shaping the next generation of doctors through teaching and mentorship. His hospital appointments at the Calgary General and extensive educational roles, including lecturing on aviation medicine and addiction, highlighting his commitment to advancing medical knowledge. And as a Civil Aviation Medical Examiner and a member of the Canadian Society of Addiction Medicine, he's a trusted expert in ensuring pilot health and safety. In occupational health, Dr. Adams has served as a physician for major organizations like Air Canada, WestJet, and Suncor, and he currently holds a medical consultant role at Air Canada Jazz and Canadian North Airlines. His expertise in addiction medicine shines through his leadership in recovery programs, including the Airline Pilots Association and the Aircrew Recovery Canada. Dr. Adams' contributions extend to leadership roles from the Alberta Occupational Health Society to Transport Canada's Aviation Medical Review Board. His work with Aircrew Recovery Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces underscores his dedication to addressing addiction in high-stakes environments. Join us as we dive into Dr. Adams' insights on medicine, aviation, and workplace health. All right. Well, here we are, Flying Minds. And today's guest, we have Dr. Brendan Adams. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. For those that don't know who Dr. Brendan Adams is, he's been in the CAMI role, which is the Civil Aviation Medical Examiner in the Western region, correct?
Pacific and Western region, yeah.
Pacific and Western.
Pacific and Northern region, I think is the technical term, but yeah.
Okay.
Everything but BC.
For a very long time, we don't need to get into the years, but unless you want to bring that up, I'll leave that up to you. So you did your doctorate here at the University of Calgary, which is about 2 blocks away from me here. At the Calgary General Hospital, you did your residency. I just wanted to mention that's where I was born.
I may have done your delivery. Who knows?
Well, I don't think so. You're not that old. No, as a matter of fact, we're probably about the same age.
I would guess so, yes.
It was 1959 I was born there.
Oh, you're a youngster, 55.
Oh.
Yeah.
Geez, you look pretty good for...
Well, it just shows you it's never too late to look young, right?
There you go. My mother always used to say, if I'd have known I was going to live this long, I'd taken better care of myself.
Yeah, that's Keith Richards' favorite line.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Well, and he can really own that one. Anyway, so why don't we start off with how you got involved in the CAMI role? Yeah,
sure. It goes back to undergraduate at University of Toronto. After first year university, I managed to get a pretty good paying job, $3.99, which was big money back then. Minimum wage was $1 an hour. So with all my excess money, I trundled down to the local airfield, Toronto Island Airport, before it was Billy Bishop. Got in an airplane that was astonishingly small, never been in a 150 before, and took flying lessons and really enjoyed it. And in second year, thought, I could be an airline pilot. But as it turned out, went in a different direction. and went through and did medicine, but I never lost my love of flying. And I always thought, okay, if I could ever combine those things. And of course, I was a physiologist as a grad student. So physiology is a big part of aviation, aerospace physiology, and it's always been my first love. So when I became a family doctor, I saw a way. Hey, I can combine both these things: clinical medicine, aerospace physiology, which I love, and my flying, which I love. And I can sit and tell stories with pilots all day long and get paid for it. How cool is that? So that's what I did.
And pilots love to tell stories.
And they love to tell stories.
You get a pilot talking and they'll go on for hours.
Some of them are even true.
Well, and some of them, maybe the traveling public doesn't even want to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that too.
Yeah. Actually, I mentioned in one of my podcasts, I said, I could probably do several podcasts on just layover shenanigans, but I probably won't.
We're going to talk about that, actually.
Oh, very good.
Because I listen to your podcast. It's good.
Well,
that's a plug, but it's good.
Thank you. Yeah. Listen to that, everybody. Here we go. So you're a CAMI, and you were going to retire. I know you were going to retire, but I see that you haven't yet. Do you continue a role as a CAMI and the other areas that you work in? What area do you spend more time at?
Yes,
besides the retirement question.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I like to think that I can be taught. My wife might disagree, but I can be. And you learn by looking at the older physicians. And I saw something that was actually kind of sad. These old boys, there was a standing joke: doctors don't retire, they die. And so these old boys, they never really got the memo, and they'd toddle into their offices, God bless them, and they were well into their 80s, and they were starting to come off the curve. They just didn't quite have what it takes anymore, and yet they didn't have any other kind of life, and they didn't retire when they should have retired. As they say in Fried Green Tomatoes, a lady always knows when it's time to leave, and I tried to be a lady about it. So, as I go past age 65, I thought, okay, this is coming up. And the other thing that I saw other CAMIs do, which I think is brutally unfair to pilots, because although I'd never let you guys know it, I love you. And that is that they suddenly retired. One day, the door was locked. And pilots have got this love-hate relationship with their CAMI. Once they learn to trust one, they don't want another one.
Mm-hmm.
And so they all needed to have their licenses looked after. So retirement was supposed to be a process, not just this sudden, unplanned event. And what I did is I was fortunate enough to team up with Mindy Gautama, Dr. Gautama, who is married to a WestJet pilot and gets it. I insisted that the docs in my clinic get it, and she gets it. And she's a really good family doc. And we worked together for 5 years. I wasn't training her, that's arrogant, but I was watching her to make sure that she knew how to do it and look after the boys properly, and girls. And then we were getting so busy that we took on Dr. Scott Forsyth, who's been a family doctor for years and has done civil aviation medicine for 19 years. And another great doc. And I thought, okay, you guys are in safe hands. I can leave now.
Right.
Because I've always wanted to do addiction medicine for pilots full time, because that's my so-called side gig that was rapidly becoming the whole thing. And it doesn't always blend well with having a full office sheet every day, having to see people for medical. So it's a long-winded answer, but I segued from doing civil aviation medicals all day long and addiction medicine on the side to doing addiction medicine all day long. And to be blunt and honest, yeah, I do still fill in for Mindy or Scott if they're gone. But largely I'm gone because, as we were talking, pilots trust you. And if they knew I was still around doing medicals, yeah, if I showed up one day a month, I'd have 900 guys wanting to see me, and I can't do that. So I'd bowed out. They've taken over YBWR Medical very capably, and it's left me free to do addiction medicine, which is what I love.
Do you do it out of the same office?
I do it out of the same office. There's some face-to-face medicine. A lot of it is now done via Zoom.
Oh, really?
And a lot of it is actually background consulting work on paper. So all the Aviation Medical Review Board work, for instance, is all on paper. And we have one meeting a month.
Going back to, pilots like to stick with their medical doctor. When I was overseas in Japan, I was gone for 10 years, and talk about having a medical. That was pretty interesting. When I came back to Canada and came back to Calgary for a medical, you were the first person I looked up. Doc Adams still got to be around.
See, you didn't have good judgment then,
I
and you
did.
don't have it now.
Well, I'll disagree with you there, but so how much time are you putting in on the addiction side? Is it a full-time job for you? And first off, tell me how you got into that addiction side of it.
Well, that's a kind of an interesting story too, because when you go through med school, there's a famous cliche which I hate, and it's they didn't teach us this in med school. Well, they also don't teach you about 90% of flying in flight school. They teach you the basic stuff you need to know so you can go out and learn the stuff that you really need to know. And doctors are no different. So when I started doing civil aviation medicine, which was almost 40 years ago now, I ran across a handful of guys that were in a recovery program, and I didn't know anything about that. And med school did not prepare me to do anything for these guys. A guy named Dr. Bill Chasik was a big mover back in the day in that area, and I attended a course down east that was put on actually by an Anglican priest, of all things, and he was very big in recovery, and loved it, really loved it, and thought, okay, this is a completely underserviced area in aviation medicine. I can do this. And so I took more training, and the more I did it, the more I liked it. And so that became a big part of my aviation medicine practice, and it just grew from there.
What part of it did you like? Was it just because it wasn't just putting a stethoscope on the heart, and what?
It's very complicated, but and again, I try not to let pilots know too much that I like them, because their heads tend to swell, and then there's a loud bang. But pilots are awesome to work with because they're self-starters. They'll fight you till the last dog's hung until they figure out what it is that you're doing and that's actually going to help. And then just get out of their way, because they don't need to be motivated anymore. Whereas in family practice, because I did that for 20 years, man, you talk to people, you show them what needed to be done. It was very simple, but they wouldn't do it. They wanted you to do it for them. It was just very frustrating to work with people that refused to help themselves. And pilots are not like that. So in addiction, when somebody gets the idea of recovery, and it takes a while, and there's going to be a fight on your hands to get them through the door. But once they're through the door, they are very rewarding to work with.
So is it like, would the pilot say to you, I have a problem? Or is it through your CAMI work with that pilot that would say, you all right? Who usually brought that up? Was that you, or was it the
Okay,
individual?
So you just walked into a trap without knowing it. So
Uh-oh.
Let me spring it now.
Okay. All right.
I listened to your podcast, the introductory segment, and I loved it. It was great. What did I love about it? I love the fact that you have the core concept that is needed is when people are dying from suicide, and we've lost 2 in the last little while, when people are getting sick with mental illness, including addiction, we need to talk about it.
100%.
We need to talk about it 1,000%. You bet. And I love that. In fact, you got so passionate, you sort of lost your train of thought there. And I thought, oh, that's the kind of emotion that I love. I want that, right? Because you're bang on. You got it. And then you said some things that hit the old addiction doc's ear a little sideways. And I thought, okay, we're going to chat about that when I get you face to face.
Oh, I love this.
And what you said, not meaning anything bad by it, of course, is you're talking about shenanigans was the word you used, and a few cocktails. And I said, okay, what I'm going to do without blindsiding is I'm going to tell you about some other shenanigans, because you asked, how do people come to our attention? Well, sometimes the shenanigans, which has a sort of a comic context to it, are tragic. And I'm going to de-identify. These are actual cases, but I'm going to de-identify them so they can't be tied back to any person. But
perfect.
How about the shenanigan where the guy is found at the bottom of a bridge abutment, 35 feet down on an overnight? and brought into ICU. It's taken him 5 years to recover from multiple trauma, brain injuries. And he had a pathological amount of alcohol on board when he was brought in the front door. That was an overnight. That was a shenanigan. They were drinking. The guy that called me from his jail cell in New York, charged with sexual assault. New York police are not a group you really want to tangle with.
Neither New York ATC.
There you go. They're all cut from the same cloth.
Exactly.
The captain that showed up bloodied with the knees out of his trousers at 4 a.m. at the front desk of a hotel demanding to be shown to his room. He was in the wrong hotel. The guy that came to our attention because of the loud altercation between him and a prostitute who'd stolen his company iPad and stolen his phone and was waking up all the guests with screaming and yelling, or the time that the captain didn't check in and his crew found him 2 floors up, covered in vomit, lying in the hotel corridor. That's how we find them, because there's this veneer to airline flying in particular that it's fun and games, sort of sophomore year, we're all adults here, let's go out and have a few cocktails, which is a euphemism for getting drunk. There's a dark underbelly to that. So what's my point in saying all this to you? You then, in your podcast, segued into a real interesting thing, very common pilot comment. When is transfer going to stop stigmatizing mental illness? When are they going to be part of the solution? When are they going to help, right? And I thought, okay, I'm going to challenge the listener, because really that's who I'm talking to. All these cases that I told you about, you want to help these guys. You really want to help these guys. You got passionate about the suicides that we've had, as you should.
Yep.
You want to help them. Go look in the mirror. What are you doing? The internet is full. The forums are full of people throwing rocks, yelling and screaming at each other, carrying on, pointing fingers. Why doesn't transport do this? Why doesn't management do that? Why doesn't the union do this? Hell with all that. Go look in the mirror. Why don't you do some things? And because pilots are literalists, they love SOPs. I came prepared to give you some concrete examples of what I think you should do.
Right.
And just take them under advisement. First thing you should do at any airline, there's some guys that are involved in something called PRP, Pilot Recovery Program.
Yep.
I won't say their names on the air, but they make no secrets of who they are within the organization. Go and buy them a coffee and say to them one simple thing. Tell me your story. I want to hear your story. And they will tell you their story. And it will be one of those stories I just told you.
That's why they got into the program in the first place.
That's why they got in the first place. And it won't be funny anymore. It'll tear your heart out. But it's a story full of hope because it shows you the way back. And then say a second thing, not a question. What do you need from me? That would be an awesome thing for anybody in the pilot mental health field, anybody in pilot recovery to do. Just yesterday, you asked me on this podcast months ago, so obviously this isn't a setup. Just yesterday, I'm staring into the face of a man who has lost his license due to alcoholism, and we're trying to debate as to how he's going to get the money together to pay for his treatment program because his airline will not back him. They do not support
And
that.
those recovery programs are very expensive.
$25,000. So this,
which is low, I think.
Well, it's a lot of money when you're unemployed. And this guy is not getting any benefits. He's just getting very basic sick pay. That doesn't pay for much.
Yeah.
That's your brother pilot. That guy needs you. That guy needs some help. In the recovery world, we need bodies. We don't have enough guys helping us out. We are broke. We don't have money. And before I go any further, I want to say, for the record, thank God for ALPA. ALPA has been very, very good to us, very generous. They have written some very big checks. And some of those checks have gone to benefit pilots that aren't even in their organization because it's the right thing to do. They back us, and that has just been superb. But they can't do it all. And in particular, they can't make guys appear when we need willing hands. So there's huge need for money, for funding, for support, and just for understanding. And so that's my little sort of pre-thought out spiel for you, is where the rubber really meets the road with pilot wellness, pilot health, and addiction in particular. Go look in the mirror and see what you can do, because we need you.
Right. So you basically, well, not basically, we're talking about addictions, alcoholism. Does it start somewhere else, though? Does it start with anxiety issues or ADHD issues or financial issues, familial issues, divorces? Is that where it starts, do you think? Or is there a lead up to that? Or is it just there's a genetic thing there that's going on?
It's a really good question, and you don't have enough tape in that machine to answer it.
Okay. Give us the Coles notes then.
Exactly. You're a pilot. Just tell me the QREF card. That's all I want to hear.
That's right.
Like most people, I'm wagering that you don't really understand the disease, and it is poorly taught in medical school. So, Volkswagen version, the disease is really functioning on two levels. The primary disease is a brain disease. Addiction isn't from something else. It often comes accompanying something else. Just as an example, one of the estimates is that 80% of female alcoholics have been raped at some point in their life, victims of sexual assault. That messes with your mind, absolutely.
80%?
Roughly, yeah.
Holy shit.
Depending on some studies. So, addiction is a multi-headed hydra. It's got all kinds of roots and origins. If I was sarcastic, I'd say to you, yeah, all of the above. If you've been brutalized ever since you were 3 years old, yeah, you're getting wired for addiction, pal.
Mm-hmm.
If you get fed substances very early on in life, most people will tell me about starting to drink at 11, 12, 13, 14. Doesn't have to be, but that's not helpful. An emerging adolescent brain, which is why kids smoking dope is so terrifying for me, because that brain is still getting remodeled till you're 25. So you're getting wired for addiction. Strong genetic component. 66% of alcoholism is accounted for by genetics. We can see that in twins raised apart. Trauma, there's a whole trauma story that goes with that, of course, but it's not that you're walking down the street, get traumatized, and then boom, suddenly you're drinking 26 ounces a day. So it's all of those things, but it's a primary brain disease. You're an addict because you're an addict. It's like saying, well, why am I diabetic? Well, genetics, environment, yes, all those things.
Well, if I may, and I'm going to use myself here, and I'm going to put myself on the spot, which makes this more real. I grew up with an alcoholic family. My grandparents were alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was an alcoholic. My brother was an alcoholic. I remember being left in a car when I was just a little kid while my family went into the bar and sat there and drank all day.
Yep.
Threw me some comics and away we go. And, in my younger years, I mean, I definitely imbibed a lot, but it got to the point where I went, this scares the hell out of me. Maybe I looked in the mirror, and because I was a pilot, flying always scared me. And I think that's probably what's kept me alive so long, is I never wanted to be in control, even control of a car or an airplane, hungover or even drunk. So I stayed away from it. Not saying that I didn't drink, which I did. But maybe, so if it's genetic, I would say that it would be genetic with me, but I just looked at it and went, no, I can't do this. How does that work?
Okay. Just because you have the genes for something doesn't mean they're going to get expressed. So for instance, when I said it's 66% linked, the flip side of that is 40% not. So it's not an automatic sentence that, yeah, my parents were alcoholics. It's very common. The lifetime prevalence of alcoholism is somewhere 10 to 13% in the population. 1 person in 10, that's a lot.
Holy.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot.
It is a lot. So the question is, well, what kinds of things protect you against that disease going any farther? And often at some juncture, there is something called sort of a natural cure. I don't like the word cure, which is why I hesitated there. But it's where you draw back in horror and say, okay, if I go any farther down this pathway, really bad things are going to happen. And you do a 180. And a lot of people, in fact, more than half the people who meet mild substance use disorder, which would, in their slang, mild alcoholism, turn around at some point and say, not for me anymore. And they go backwards. They may not totally quit drinking, but they don't drink as abusively as they did. So at some point in time, you had that. So you would have had some protective factors. But the problem is that the provoking factors are all additive. So if you've got the genes, if you've got really abusive parenting, if you run into trauma early on in life, those things all start to add up to where your brain just cannot do the 180 anymore. And you said an interesting thing. I would never want to be in control of an airplane and be drunk. Neither would any alcoholic. It's one of the first things that the alcoholic pilot says to me is, I never flew drunk. And he will, and he probably did. He flew when he was less than capable, hungover usually. But we've all got these magic lines that we say we're not going to pass. And that's the definition of the disease, is you go past the magic line. You go past it. You didn't want to, you didn't mean to. That's why it's a disease. That's why the Canadian Human Rights Act defines it as disease, because you don't want to do what you're doing.
Right.
But you wind up doing it anyways.
Yeah. So you say there's that line that you cross, and I know this isn't going to segue very well, maybe it will. Talk about recovery programs then. If it's a genetic thing and you've been in that genetic forever, 66%, I think is what you said.
Yep.
How does a recovery program help?
Excellent question. So what do we do about this? And recovery is, again, something that's very poorly taught, poorly understood. Recovery is a profound alteration in how you interact with the world and yourself. And it is a process. It's bad example, but it's a little bit like saying to you, tell me about falling in love. What's that like? Well, you're going to use all kinds of adjectives, right?
We're talking about a dog or a spouse.
Be anything. It could be anything. It's a process your brain undergoes. Tell me about maturing. You're not the same person as when you were 15. So what happened? You could talk for hours about how that happened. So obviously, we take you through a very accelerated growing up period to get you into recovery. And the predominant tool we use, it's not the only tool, is AA. AA is cliche. That's why people overlook it. As an addiction doc, I am continually blown away by how incredibly insightful AA is. And a lot of the AA stuff is entirely congruent with modern neurobiology. And they put that all together in 1934 before we knew anything about the neurochemistry and neurobiology of addiction. So, simple answer, you follow a 12-step program of recovery, and that will guide you through growing up and changing your relationship to yourself, first and foremost, and then to the rest of the world.
Okay, so is it a love of self then that really, it sounds, if I was to say something that would learn how to love yourself.
Learn how to love yourself would be a big part of it. AA has a wonderful set of phrases which sound Hallmark cardish, I know that, but they can be grasped by a mind that is not well. And they say, to thine own self be true. That's one of the AA slogans. And that's very profound if you stop to think about it. Be true to yourself. Stop fighting who you are, who you want to become. Stop fighting the best version of you. Learn to love you in a healthy way. We're not talking about narcissism, which actually isn't self-love.
Correct.
It's the lack of self-love which drives narcissism. But be true to yourself. And if you can be true to yourself, you can be true to others as well.
Well, you could use that term in anything in today's world.
You want to know what the number one thing is we hear from guys coming out of the treatment center? Everybody should do this. And they mean it. Tears in their eyes. They say, I never thought it was going to be that awesome. And everybody, whether they're alcoholic or not, should do this program. And I talk to managers all the time. I mean, Enlightened Airlines back this for some very pragmatic reasons. This is captain training in the very best sense of the word. What do you want out of a captain? He already knows how to fly the airplane. You all know how to fly airplanes. You want someone skilled in human interaction, who can handle the crew that's at war with each other in the back, that can handle delays, that can handle disruptive passengers, that can handle whatever the world throws at them with equanimity. You get that from a 12-step program. He looks after himself, can be mature, can deal with all different kinds of personalities in the other seat. Those are all skills that they learn in recovery. And so what you get out of it, amongst many things, is an awesome captain.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm going to say within the last couple of weeks, where I work, we have a lot of young first officers, and their goal is to become a captain. And one of them asked me, what should I do, to become a captain? I said, well, what you're doing here is, flying. I said, the flying side I can see you can do. Exactly what you just said. I said, being a captain is not about handling the airplane. Being a captain is being able to handle all the bullshit outside of the flight deck.
Absolutely.
Handling the CSAs, handling the delays, handling ATC, the fuel truck guy. It goes everywhere. And the back end. How do you deal with all the shit that goes on in the back? Right.
So let me ask you, do you typically find training captains are all warm and fuzzy and gushy?
Oh, no.
No, they aren't. So let me tell you a story. Training captain who knew nothing about, we'll call him John Doe, but John Doe was in there for his upgrade training, phones up the director of flight operations and just gushes about this kid. He was the most prepared. He said this guy was so mature. He knew his stuff. There was no messing around. He was enthusiastic. He was teachable. He listened to me, and then he did what he needed to do. Top notch, managed to pull through other candidates that maybe weren't as strong as he was. That's our guy. Just came out of recovery. That was his first trip back because he was due for his upgrade.
Oh.
And of course, training captain didn't know that, doesn't need to know that. But what he was actually seeing in this pilot had nothing to do with flying skills and everything to do with recovery. So this pilot came there, took it seriously, was grounded, was fantastic in terms of interpersonal interactions, great attitude. That's what a recovering person is. AA has this wonderful phrase out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If we have what you want and you're prepared to go to any lengths to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And in essence, it's saying it's a program of attraction. I have to have something you want. You're not going to do this because someone's forcing you to do it. You're doing it because you want to be like that guy. And so that's the whole idea, is this young captain to be had it. He had that magical quality of attraction. Whatever it is you're smoking, pal, I want some of that.
Right. So maybe it's not what they want. Maybe it's what they don't want. Maybe the realization that I'm tired of being like this. I'm tired of, going down this road. I know who I don't want to be. Like I grew up in a trucking family, and, my father wanted me a truck driver. And people always ask me, do you always want to be a pilot? I said, no, I just knew what I didn't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
You could use that on the same side, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we call that recovery capital. These are all things that you bring to the table. And it's a holistic grab bag of stuff. What can go into your recovery capital? So sure, a passionate desire to not be something, a passionate desire to be a better version of. I don't really care. You bring it to the table, I'll work with it. But you got to have something.
They've looked in the mirror long enough, then said.
Looked in the mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you noticed the changes in the working conditions over the decades that you've been doing this? In aviation, 30 years ago was not the same as it was today, or it was way different than what it is today. Have you noticed any of those changes? Types of airplanes, the different, the technology is different. Have you noticed any of those changes that have been detrimental or caused any of the anxiety or any of the directions that we're going here with mental health? or how has it affected?
Yeah, that's a really profound question, and I would actually have to think. That's the problem with an interview is you're live, but sure, there's all kinds. There's all kinds. We are dealing with an industry that is in constant upheaval. There was no such thing as low-cost carriers in the 1970s.
Mhm.
If you made it to
Well, they were, but they just didn't know it.
they just didn't know. Fair enough. If you made it to the majors, you made it. In fact, there were these crown jewel jobs in aviation medicine. I always remember the director of Canadian International walking into a room. You would have swore it was King Charles. I mean, even Transport Canada gathered around this guy. And I thought, wow, I mean, did the Pope just walk in?
Yeah.
So that level of power and control and money, airlines had deep pockets. They were making buckets of money, and they could afford to run half-empty airplanes. So you had job security. You didn't get your upgrade for 10 years. Everyone expected that.
Mhm.
The left seat was jammed. Now, totally different. Pilots know that if they get this gig going 10 years, they've done well. Not everything is an Air Canada or a WestJet.
Correct.
So it can be very, very threatening to you. Aviation is the only job in which you come home and say, guess what, honey, I got a promotion, and your wife starts crying because your salary just got cut in half. So this idea of upgrading from first officer to captain, you're going to take a cut in pay sometimes. You're certainly going to get a way crappier schedule. If you were a senior FO and you go in to be a junior captain, your life just got messy. And it didn't used to be that way. 4 or 5 day layovers in Europe, they don't do that anymore.
No. You don't make money doing that.
You don't make money doing that. Everything is money, money. Let's turn this machine around. Let's run it as hard as we can. Let's run you as hard as we can. Commensurate with safety, not to be unreasonable and throw stones, but still much, much tougher, way longer hours. And then if you really want to stir up a hornet's nest, you get into societal change. You and I both have funny colored hair that's not brown or black anymore. And so, you probably got whacked in school. I got whacked. I got a big red X when I got something wrong. You're now dealing with a generation of people that didn't get schooled that way. And if you really want to get an old captain waxing eloquent, start talking about that. And, millennials, and off he goes, right?
Yeah.
It cuts both ways, because we had it a sweet deal.
We did.
Back when we were young, too.
I do remember getting strapped, though.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you a story about jazz, which is interesting. Jazz went to its young FOs and did a remarkable thing. If you want to know what somebody thinks, ask them. Airlines don't do that. So they took them to a retreat away from all the senior management so they could be honest, and they say, what do you like? What don't you like? What would make us the employer of choice? What would make you leave and go somewhere else? Great questions. And as in all great questions, they got back answers they weren't expecting. And one of them is they liked sim. I mean, when was the last time you heard a pilot say that? Because they liked being right or wrong. They liked being told that was good, that was not good, because they came from a scholastic system that never said that. So when we were taught in medical school how to train young doctors, we were told as teachers, don't ever say that was good. That'll make somebody feel well, but it doesn't help them. Tell them why it was good. What did they do that was so good, and what could they do more of that would make it even better? Be concrete. And that's what modern young pilots love, is some grizzled old training captain will say to them, do it this way, do that, do this. And the definitive, I got it right, is really a kind of cool thing for a lot of these folks. So that's changed. Mm-hmm. And mental health wise, it's very different, because you have kids that have never been told no. They're never told that's wrong. So they don't have that resilience. They just can't incorporate that experience. You and I got told that's wrong all the time and whacked. So we either broke us or we developed resilience, and we have some of that.
It's interesting. We have a young Japanese first officer whose father was or is a consulate, works in the consulate in Japan. which is a fairly high-ranking position over in Japan. And he kind of grew up always being patted on the back. You're doing good. You're doing good. You're doing good. Never had that, what are you doing? And one of our senior instructors had to have a sit down with him and give it hard to him. And he actually broke into tears and said, you want this to work, you're going to have to accept that you're not always going to be right. And we're not always going to pat you on the back. Okay. We're going to tell you when it's wrong. We're going to tell you what to do. It's how you take it and what what you put into it. And he'd never been talked to like that before.
Yeah. And that segues into mental health. Somebody that simply can't incorporate that kind of feedback is going to get depressed or get extremely anxious. So there needs to be support for that. There needs to be understanding that when you're dealing with a 25-year-old FO, his or her experience of the world is going to be radically different than yours. And a piece of feedback that wouldn't devastate you at all, you wouldn't feel good about it, but it wouldn't devastate you, may destroy this person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important and incumbent on airlines, on training units, to get together and, flying minds, talk about how to give feedback to a group of people whose experience of the world is quite different than yours and mine.
Well, it's interesting the way that you said that, which brought up another thought here, another situation we had at Lynx Air, which it isn't here anymore.
Do we cross ourselves when you say that?
I could probably do that every morning. We had a young girl who was just a flight instructor. She had 2,500 hours. I did her check ride. And she had a great attitude, very sharp, knew the books, but had never been in that aviation world. And it took her a long time. And, the initial line of dock instructors understood, she doesn't have this. She's going to take some time. Well, one of our training captains beat her up mentally. And she called and said, I'm done. I said, what are you talking about? And she told me what had happened, and he just completely destroyed everything that she'd done.
Mm-hmm.
So you're absolutely right. We need to have a better understanding how these younger individuals are, how they understand the way that they work, right?
Absolutely.
Do you tailor so talking about mental health, do you tailor every addiction counseling or mental health issue? I guess you'd probably see that as a cameo role. You'd probably see some of that mental health issue. They're not going to come up. But do you have questions how you kind of tailor your meeting with the individual?
Yeah.
I don't know if
I know where you're going with it.
Okay.
Let's talk about mental health more broadly than just addiction.
Okay.
Deal with lots of pilots with mental health issues. There are some commonalities. You've got to be so careful, because if I said to you, pilot, you're automatically going to think airline, flying, jet, etc. But it could be a beaver on floats. It could be a helicopter pilot out of Northern Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Lots and lots of difference. And you understand that difference. So you can't treat pilots like they're all cookie cutters. They're all different human beings. They're extroverts, introverts, blah, blah, blah. But they do have some common qualities. And some of them are good and some of them are not so good. Pilots love to fix things. And they hate to be out of control. You mentioned it yourself. You love being in control. And being mentally challenged, let's say, start with that, because it goes from there into mental illness, means that your control is being challenged. And so you will watch these guys. That's why pilots are very gratifying. They'll try a bunch of stuff first, and it's not working. And they will hang on deep into the stall, and they'll keep pulling. And at a certain point, when they come to my office, I'm the place of last resort. By the time they're there, they've already tried 12 things.
Mm-hmm.
They're inverted and still yanking hard. So the first thing you have to do with these guys is punch them in the head and say, let go. Stop that.
Yep.
This is not working.
Yep.
And some of them are almost relieved. Oh, thank God, someone else is going to do something. And what happens with an airplane that's doing something bad and you let go of it? Almost always something better happens. Maybe not exactly what you want.
They're inherently stable.
They're inherently stable. So are humans.
Yeah.
So we just stop them from doing crazy. And the second thing, and again, this is going to go back to my comment of look in the mirror. We fly wing with them. People need people. Pilots tend to isolate when they're not doing well because they're shamed. Silence and shame is rocket fuel for mental illness. So break those. And the first thing I will do is make sure that this person has got a wingman, a wing person, if we want to be politically correct. They need support. The secrecy has to stop. They need to talk. They need help. You had Diane Walters on here. I think the world of Dr. Walters. She's one of my go-to psychologists because she's got this wonderful style. She understands pilots. Here's your checklist. Here's your QREF card. Do that. Oh boy, just get out of the way. Pilots will do it. They are motivated people. You do not need to motivate them. They just need to know what needs to be done and then look out. Afterburners go on and they will do it. But when they see me, they are upside down and inverted. They don't know which way is up. All they know how to do is pull, and it's not working.
Right. Yeah. My interview with Tim Morgan, we got talking about the stress of running businesses and, things going sideways. We know, the things that have gone sideways for the airline business for Tim. But he said, you have to put everything in a little box there, and that's where it goes. You deal with that right away.
Yep.
Do you go into any sort of a holistic approach, if I may use that term, as opposed to, Diane, I love Diane. She's great. I don't know if you'd call that a holistic approach. Is there any other holistic, exercise? Do you go down any other avenues beside the mental side of it that helps the mental side?
Yeah, it goes without saying. I always love to use crappy aviation analogies. That's what I'm known for. And when you're flying an airplane, it takes what it takes. You do what is necessary to execute either that phase of the flight or that mission or that emergency or that problem. And you better be flexible. If you come in with a rigid, narrow viewpoint that there's only 3 things that we can do here, and then I'm going to start screaming and throw my hands up and pull the fire bottles, you're not going to have a very long career. So you need flexibility, right? Psychotherapy is no different. So meet people where they're at, find out what their values are. In very generic terms, your mind is your brain, is part of your body, and it does better when it sleeps, when it exercises, when it eats right, and when it's spiritually in a good place. So those are no-brainers. That's like movements and attitudes. You do that with everybody, and it will be different for each person as to what that means to them. As an example, a lot of us, not just Indigenous people, but a lot of us really relate to Indigenous spirituality. In our modern world that's less hooked into organized religion, a lot of Indigenous thinking is very congruent with some of our approaches to things. So I've had Caucasian, white guys go through addiction treatment where they discovered sweats and sweetgrass ceremonies and loved it, absolutely loved it. So it can be something unexpected like that. Or it can be something as simple as, okay, get your butt out of this couch and go for a run every morning or a walk. Get moving.
Go to yoga.
Go to yoga. Yoga, the neurobiology of yoga is actually very interesting. It introduces profound changes in the areas of the brain that are activated. Meditation is another thing that does that. And we will watch parts of the brain that govern anxiety damp down. We'll watch parts of the brain that have to do with emotional memory activate. So it's that's a whole topic in itself. Is what is yoga actually doing?
Wow.
What is prayer doing when people do it?
Is there different types of meditation or any type of meditation? You brought that up. I'm just curious because there are if you look on social media now, and there's all sorts of different types of meditation, breath work, transcendental meditation. There's different styles.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't
It's
matter.
what works for you.
Yeah.
It's like saying, well, what kind of exercise is best? Very broad question.
I hate running. I'll cycle my bike.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cross training, weights. So generally you want aerobic and resistive, so you can make general statements like that. So with whatever spiritual practice we're talking about, I want some quiet time, I want some focus, and I want something that has some greater spiritual meaning to you. Beyond that, it's very individual.
I like the fact that you brought up spiritual. That's one of the things that I don't know if it's just me in the age that I'm at, but I'm finding that I require that more now at my age.
Every human requires that. You just didn't know it.
Well, you're probably right. I mean, I remember doing transcendental meditation when I was in high school, and it did help. I remember my father, who was a farm boy, he just kind of looked at me and go, "What the hell are you doing?" Right? I did it for a number of years, and just recently I've started to go, I need to do this more. Yeah, it's really good for the soul.
To return to our sort of sub-theme of today, in addiction recovery, again, the big book of AA says we gain our freedom every day by being in a fit spiritual state. The fit spiritual state is the cornerstone of recovery. If you are not in a fit spiritual state for that day, you are not in recovery. And you will find very quickly you lose your emotional sobriety. You may not lose your chemical sobriety in drink or drug, but you're going to lose your emotional sobriety. And so that is predicated on a fit spiritual state. And how you achieve a fit spiritual state is defined in your program. And there's a series of things that you do. You've mentioned some of them: meditation, prayer, reading, quiet time, exercise. Different for each person.
Yeah, I even found that I'll put on, you can put on the different frequencies, like the 417 hertz, and there's several others, and just put it on, and I'll just lie down on my couch here and let that listen to it for about half an hour.
I just put 7700 on the transponder, and I keep squawking my tent, and I find that takes me out of myself. All kinds of really cool things start happening.
Yeah, I'll bet. Tell you what, let's take a quick break.
Sure.
And we'll get into a few of these other things after our break. Stand by and we'll be back with you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Flying Minds. If you liked what you heard today, send me a message to chat@flyingminds.com, or you can view our website at flyingminds.com. I'd like to give a shout out to Grizzy Graphics for all the work on the logo, and to Evan Baldwin, who can be found at TTV_Valence for his help in editing and website design. All right, welcome back to Flying Minds. And today's guest, we have Dr. Brendan Adams, and we're going to get right back into, or segue into what we were talking about. Aircrew Recovery Program in Canada, Aircrew Recovery Canada. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, be happy to. The acronym, of course, is ARC, ARC, and as you just said, it stands for Aircrew Recovery Canada. There is something, and we can get too technical for a podcast and bore the heck out of everybody, but transport governs how it deals with various things using something called staff instructions. And there's a technical reason why. Don't need to get into that. But there's a staff instruction to do with substance use disorder, which is the fancy pants word for addiction. And it's staff instruction 404-008. And if you go to look that up, it's not online, which is kind of bad because a lot of the other staff instructions are, but not this one. And if you will, it is SOPs. It tells us everything that you need to do if you have either a mild substance use disorder or they lump moderate and severe into their second stream. So think back to your flying days. Private pilot, commercial pilot, instrument pilot. You had a syllabus. You had a list of things you had to do, both in the air and what you had to learn. Staff instruction is really the same thing. So if you want to go flying again, you're going to do these things. Well, you start to read that list, and it's a little scary. First of all, you don't understand half the things they're asking. Second of all, you don't know where you would go to get those things done. And third of all, you've got nobody to show you how it's done. So we knew that. And of course, at all big airlines, they have PRPs that we talked about. Air Canada terms it PHRP, but same idea, pilot recovery programs. And if you're a great big airline with bags of money, you can afford to do that. If you're a little operator with 3 crop dusters, you can't afford that. If you're a helicopter operator, you can't afford that. Even if you're, a small air ambulance outfit, something like that. But those are real pilots. Those are commercial pilots. How are they going to access recovery? Well, they can't, not easily. So a person that I hope that you have on as a guest got the vision for Aircrew Recovery Canada at WestJet, but it's not a WestJet program, and sort of floated this amongst those of us working in PRP at the various airlines, and happily this has come to fruition. And again, plug for ALPA with ALPA money and support. Well, they've been great. This is a not-for-profit, non-affiliated. It's not an ALPA organization. It's a standalone, separate thing called Aircrew Recovery Canada. And basically, its mission is to bring recovery to airlines and smaller air operators and small commercial operators, right down to private pilots who don't have access to all of this stuff. And if you want to put it in the simplest possible terms, it is a group of people who know what to do. Because if there's a big problem I see in aviation is you'll spot a problem, you'll spot somebody drinking hard, you got concerns. This is not a mystery where this is starting to become apparent, but you don't know what to do. Or worse, it's identified. Yeah, you got this disease. You're in emerge. The emerge doc says, gee whiz, I think you got a drinking problem.
Right.
Who knows what to do? ARC. That's who knows what to do. So as we eventually visualize this, it is not up and running to that degree yet. We're going to have teams across Canada, preferably one in each province, but at least starting with 4 or 5 teams. We've got 2 teams stood up now, soon to be 3. What's a team? An addiction doc, a trained peer pilot who has more than 2 years of recovery, but basically typically has 5 to 10 years of recovery.
Oh, they're a recovery.
They are in recovery themselves.
In recovery themselves.
That is the single most important part.
Okay.
Zebras need zebras. You, sir, are a zebra.
Okay.
You do not need penguins. You need other zebras.
Okay.
So a pilot is only going to trust another pilot who's been through the same thing he's going through right now. As a doctor, I can tell him all kinds of things. It's true, but he can't hear them from me. He's going to hear them from the peer pilot who sits him down over coffee and says, let me give you the dope on this. This is what's happening.
Right.
And so we've got the forms. We've got the monitoring agreements. We can go to your management if there is such a thing. We can tell them, here's what's going to happen next. We can warn the pilot, this letter is coming from transport. Everybody gets this letter. Don't freak out. We fly wing with them. That is the single most important thing of anybody that's in mental health crisis, particularly addiction. Is there somebody on your wing that knows what to do? And in ARC there is.
Is Transport Canada part of this program?
They can't be, because they're not allowed as a government agency to promote any particular point of view,
right,
or any particular corporate entity, whether it's not for profit or a profit one. So for instance, they can't say, well, if you go to this treatment center, we'll give you your license back. That's strictly unethical. They can't do that. But they are well aware of ARC. They like what ARC is doing, and they support ARC. And unofficially, I know they breathe a big sigh of relief when they see, oh, okay, ARC's got this guy. So we know that we're going to get the reports we need, the quarterly reports. The quarterly reports will have the 18 items that we want, because we've got the form. We know what it says. I fill those out. They're going to get the tests they want done. The pilot's going to go to a treatment center that's ethical, that's good, it's competent, and he's going to have a peer pilot flying wing with him in tight formation.
Are these pilots that have lost their medical?
The peer pilots?
No, the pilots that want to enter the ARC program.
Yes.
They've already lost their medical, and then they kind of look in the mirror and say, I need to do something.
Well, I should back up. Our vision eventually is we're the 1-800 number for when you think you got a problem. Because we've mentioned several times throughout this podcast, suicide.
Yeah.
One of the drivers of suicide is hopelessness and despair. I don't know what to do. My career is over.
Don't know who to talk to.
Don't know who to talk to. I'm sitting here with a bottle that I don't want to finish, but I know I'm going to. I'm in my apartment. It's late at night. I think I'm getting fired. Life is hopeless. I don't know the way forward. So why don't I just end it? That's the way the thinking goes. It's diseased thinking. So the idea is, no. Call us. We know what to do. Your life is not over. Your career is not over. We know what to do.
How? So where's are most airlines on board with this? And so I'm an airline and I see an individual that has a problem. How do I make that call, or how do I make that statement or suggestion to this individual? Say, you need to talk to somebody.
There's two questions there, really. So let's split them apart.
Okay.
The first is, are most airlines on board with this? The good ones are. There's some really hard-nosed, good business reasons for backing this.
100%.
Hull losses tend to reflect negatively on your bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
Drunk pilots making headlines in newspapers tend to reflect badly. And this is one of the things that I think ALPA understands. Any airline, it doesn't matter if it's your rival airline, where somebody shows up unfit to fly and it hits the front pages of the Toronto Sun, this is not helpful to the industry.
No kidding.
This hurts all of us.
Yep.
It invites regulatory interventions from people that don't care and don't know about flying. Do you have not enough rules? Do you want some more rules? No, none of us want that. And the rules generally don't even address the issue. Look at Germanwings. The rules that flowed out of that did not address what that originally was all about.
There's a lot of rules that have happened because of that, though.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so we don't want that, right?
Yep.
So airlines, even the hard-nosed ones, look at what we're proposing and they go, this makes really good business sense. We'll throw some money into this because we're going to save a ton. And I already mentioned, a pilot in recovery is an awesome captain. You just saved the airline $50,000 in retraining it doesn't need to spend on you. But I digress. The bottom line is that they do. There's a big difference between association airlines and non-association airlines. So when there's an association airline, this is an ALPA endorsed program. So the ALPA guys breathe a big sigh of relief because they can phone ALPA National and, the big boss man can say, oh yeah, we know this program. Relax. It's okay. Our guys are not getting screwed over by this program. In fact, they're getting saved by this program. So the backing of ALPA National is huge, and it immediately calms down the local MEC. These are not a bunch of interlopers that are trying to get our guys in trouble. If it's a non-association airline, little tougher, you got to talk to HR because HR understands wrongful dismissal, human rights complaints. They understand the softer side of the business, the personnel side of the business. They understand short-term disability and long-term disability costs. And they look at what we're doing and they realize we're going to save them a ton of money. And we're going to relieve them of all kinds of headaches. Because the second part of the question says, well, what do you do? Well, we know what to do. Just give your guy to us. We'll do the intervention. So we'll go and talk to him. We need the raw data from you, but then the rest of it, we'll handle that. And HR just goes, thank God, you'll talk to this guy? Yeah, we'll talk to this guy. And we can talk to him as only one pilot can talk to another one. So rather than the head of HR, who may be a person that doesn't fly airplanes that you don't trust and you see as an enemy, it's your old buddy from ComAir. Shows up and sits down and says, do you remember when we used to fly at ComAir together 25 years ago? Well, I want to talk to you, pal.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of it, he delivers the hard news. There's been some concern on the line about your drinking.
Right.
Can we talk about that? And we do what's called a first level intervention. Intervention levels come in 3 levels. First level intervention is an expression of concern, and it should come from somebody who's in the program. We were chatting off mic about, what do I do about that? Well, you probably shouldn't do very much about it other than get somebody who knows what to do involved. Because
I'm not an SME on that. So
you're not, and you're going to put your foot in it.
Yep.
But do say something rather than nothing. But certainly try to get the guys some help. So our guys come in and a first level intervention is an expression of concern. We've noticed this. We're concerned about you. Can we help you? Screw off. I don't want to talk to you guys. No, you can't. All right. We don't live in a totalitarian society. We can't force you into treatment. But if the disease is what we think it is and it continues to march on unabated, you'll be back. And they are. Second level intervention is an expression of concern with some concrete actions. Here's what we want you to do. We want you to go for this assessment. We want you to do X, Y, and Z. And we'll lay it out for the guy. Screw off. I don't want to talk to you guys. I don't have to do that. You can't make me do that. No, we can't. A third level intervention is generally when the proverbial poop has hit the fan.
Right.
And there's been an incident, like one of those overnight incidents that I mentioned to you that are no longer shenanigans. They're tragedies. Then it is an expression of concern, a concrete course of action, and consequences. You're going to do this, or you're not going to be flying airplanes anymore. And generally at that stage, the pilot knows if he's gone that far and hasn't paid attention to our previous 2 attempts, he's done.
I'm spitballing here just because you can probably see the smoke coming out of my ears. The term that I've heard, and you've heard me say it, the pilots suffer in silence, reference, addiction counseling or alcoholism. When you see an individual, they don't want to say anything because they don't want to lose their job. Right. So they're going to try and keep it as quiet as they possibly can.
Sure.
Do you see that before they come out and say it? Or does somebody else come up and say, this individual needs help?
Well, it can be both. Again, I'm going to underscore the point. The secret sauce in our program are peer pilots. They're not me.
Right.
And they're not Diane. They're not counselors. They're not medically trained. You talk about subject matter experts. You don't get to be a bigger subject matter expert in alcoholism unless you're an alcoholic. That's the best training in the world.
Right.
So these are people that can sit down with you and say, this is what I see. And my boys will continually uncover things that I go, I didn't get that. That's incredible. How'd you get him to tell you that? Because there's trust. One pilot, when the chips are down, generally pilots trust another pilot, particularly if they're genuine. And these guys are the most genuine you're ever going to meet. That's why I'm asking our podcast listeners, go have a chat with these guys. Have a coffee with them. They've got a story to tell you that's very, very interesting, and they'll show you how this whole thing works. But it starts with one pilot talking to another pilot, and that's what gets us there. So it may simply be a friend phones us up and says, I'm really worried about John Doe. He's drinking a lot. Or it may be a doctor. It may be a number of different things. But the very first person I'll send shooting in there is my peer pilot. I won't go. Peer pilot goes and sits down with the guy. And then when he stonewalls us, okay, then we have to go to the bigger guns.
Right. Obviously, you have a website or a phone number, or let's talk about that. Let's get so that our listeners, what we can do is if you are concerned about this and want to become part of it or get into the Aircrew Recovery Canada program, and you don't know how to, you can always send Flying Minds an email.
Yeah.
To chat@flyingminds.com. Send us an email, and I can get you the information, and it's completely confidential. I would never, because I would never pass that on to anybody other than the Aircrew, Recovery Canada program. I don't know how else would we.
Aircrew Recovery Program has a website that is currently in its final stages of construction, but it isn't up yet. So I think the Flying Minds thing is the best way to go. Absolutely. And plus it's got that sort of cutout thing. I'm happy, and I've done it many times before, fielding an anonymous inquiry. I've got this friend, and this friend is doing the following things.
Right.
I've heard that before. I'm happy to answer about this friend and tell you where it's going to go. You said something that I didn't want to miss. You said, guy's going to keep it on the down low and he's going to hide it because he doesn't want to lose his career. If you want to lose your career and ultimately your life, and it's a proven scientific fact that dead people don't fly airplanes, except sometimes at Air Canada, but I digress. You're going to lose your career by staying hidden.
Keep going down that road. It's eventually going to rear its ugly head.
I don't want you telling anybody about our busted main spar. Let's just cover that up And if we angle the x-ray machine just this way, it'll miss the crack in the main spar, and then we dodged that bullet. No, you didn't. The wing is going to fall off. You just don't know when. So let's deal with the crack in the main spar right now while it's still salvageable, rather than at 40,000 feet when you hear that loud thud and you notice that you now have a whole lot more dihedral than you had before.
Or the O-rings are worked for the 6 shuttle missions that went off.
Yes.
And that's called normalization of deviance.
Yes.
We don't want to continue down that road.
No.
Okay, great. So ARC would be fine with me passing on, using us as a conduit, I guess,
Absolutely.
if they want to,
Absolutely.
because I think it's a great service. So, well, there you go. I think you answered that question. Is there anything else you want to talk about, reference the ARC program?
Yeah, stay tuned for further. Obviously on a more bureaucratic level, what we're trying to bring in is PRP at every airline. I want to see Canada a country where there's a PRP at every airline. So it's your guys. You trust them. I keep saying the word guys. Of course, there are gals too.
Yes, absolutely.
There's trust is how this whole thing runs. If you don't have it, you've got nothing. So on a more institutional level, would ARC come and give a talk at your organization, your airline? Absolutely. Love to. Love to. The director of ARC goes all across Canada talking at flight schools, talking at small air operators, because that's who we need to reach now. We've got the WestJets and the Air Canadas and the Canadian Norths and the Jazzes. We've got them in our pocket. They're nicely looked after.
Mm-hmm.
But the smaller ones, no, we don't got
funding.
Yes.
So we need to get more funding for that.
Yes, we do.
That's something that I think I'm going to have to look into.
Yeah. The funding thing is the ugly underbelly of any movement to do anything. Somebody that we haven't even talked about as our pilot sits there contemplating the end of all things in front of a bottle. What about his wife and kids upstairs that are sleeping? Who's helping them? Nobody. Is there anything out there for them? Zip. Nada. They are on their own. We're going to take him under our wing, literally. We're going to send him to a treatment center. Who helps her? Nobody.
Oh,
who helps those kids? Nobody. We need a pilot family program that she can at least phone somebody who's been through this before and say, I don't know what to do and I don't know where the groceries money is coming from next week.
Oh, that gives me goosebumps.
Mm-hmm. So yes, we need funding. My poor guy yesterday that we're saying, okay, how much money you got? That's obscene. Why should this man's life and career hang on his bank balance when he's not working? There's pilots that would write us a check. There's pilots that have written us a check. And we just put it in the ARC funds, and that goes to guys that can't afford. I'll tell you a little story. We had a guy from Northern Ontario who drove his car to Vancouver Island because he couldn't afford airfare to get into treatment, and drove back and had no disability coverage. So he was cleaning buses. That's how he fed his family while he was waiting for his license to come back. So, there's lovely stories at the big airlines. You guys got really good disability benefits. Your salary will continue. And a lot of smaller places, there's no disability benefits. You got no job and you got no license. So you got no way to earn it. Another guy was framing houses all through the winter. That's what he did. That's what he had to do.
Wow. So this program really needs to expand, not only financially, but also to include the families. And that's one of the things that actually Diane has really helped me with this, is that, we've talked about pilots being people too, but we can't forget the other half. If there's families, whether it's your spouse and kids, or whether it's just your partner, or maybe it's your brothers and sisters, your mother, father, whoever it is, that are all part of this when there is issues like this.
The addict has the disease, the family hurts.
Yeah. And how do we help them? What do we need to do? We need to expand the program then.
We do.
Well, anybody that listens to this that has any ideas, send us a message to chat@flyingminds.com, and I'll definitely pass that on to the individuals. Let's talk quickly about trending issues or things that are pretty prevalent in today's society. ADHD medication. Have you noticed an increase in that in the aviation industry?
Yeah, that one's huge, and I'm glad you brought that up. Getting outside the addiction world, unfortunately, there shouldn't be fads in medicine, but there are. And so you'll see a diagnosis come along, and I'm an old enough guy as an OC doc, I can say, repetitive strain injury. You won't hear too much about RSI anymore. In 1992, that was all that anybody was talking about. And I actually did my Board of Occupational Medicine thesis on repetitive strain injury. It was a fad diagnosis. And it doesn't mean that the people that were suffering from it didn't have pain in an extremity or didn't have a diagnosable condition, because they did. But it got lumped in, and then it suddenly becomes an epidemic. And now, if you are guilty of attending school while male, you get the diagnosis of ADHD. Now, I'm being sarcastic, of course. But there's a number of things that predispose, especially to young males, being diagnosed as having attention deficit disorder. The number one group that makes the diagnosis are teachers, not doctors. The teacher calls mom in, points to the little hellion, like you, and says, I think your son has ADHD. You should try him on some medication. And the overworked family doctor says, well, yeah, okay, here's some methylphenidate. Here's some Ritalin. Fill your boots. Let us know how Junior does. Well, it's a stimulant. Junior appears to pay more attention. Maybe he does ADHD. Maybe he doesn't. Doesn't get a proper assessment. So on we go, and that now becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He's got this diagnosis through grade 6, grade 7, grade 8. Well, it comes along to grade 12, and he wants to fly airplanes. He never had an assessment for ADHD, but he's only been on medication now for 5 years, so he's certainly got some side effects from that. He comes into Adam's office, and Adams takes one look at him and goes, okay, we have a problem. ADHD is not acceptable on medication. We are going to first and foremost do what should have been done 15 years ago. We're going to get proper assessment on you. Well, it turns out he doesn't have it, and likely never did have it. So this is one of the problems, is that when diagnoses become fads, medication gets dished out left, right, and forward. There's not proper assessments being done. I'm not saying ADHD doesn't exist. It does. Mm-hmm. It is a problem. Mm-hmm. But it's getting overdiagnosed and overtreated. It can respond to behavioral modifications. It can respond to environmental modifications. You don't need to go immediately to a pill. But handing somebody a pill is the easiest way to shut them up and get them out of your office. So unfortunately, it happens too often.
Is it addictive, these medicines?
Well, addictive amphetamines certainly are psychoactive medications which can be addictive. I don't find that that's the major problem. You don't get a 15-year-old air cadet in that's got addiction to his Ritalin, but he can't go any further with his career until we get him off it, and getting him off it is very unpleasant. So it's certainly
how so?
A lot of side effects. The best way to view stimulant drugs and sedative drugs is they're a trim tab. And so when you're flying along, if suddenly somebody's just easing the trim down.
Hang on a sec. We need stop right there. Hold on there. For listeners that aren't aviation people, I call them ground people, and no offense to the ground people. Dr. Adams likes to use these aviation metaphors, and when he starts throwing in trim tab, you're going to look at, I'm sure you're going to look at what the hell is he talking about? So I love them, and pilots are going to love it, but a trim tab is something we use on an airplane. So sorry, I just had to say.
It's a way of biasing the nose up or down, let's say.
Yeah.
So what's happening is that you're trimming constantly by introducing this external drug, and what the brain is doing is constantly working against it, because your brain is trying to maintain that zero steady state. So if I'm giving you a stimulant all the time, the brain is turning the volume down, turning it down. And as you know, another aviation analogy, if the trim is all the way to the top or the bottom and you suddenly kick the autopilot off, very dramatic things are going to suddenly happen.
Better be hanging on the control.
You better be hanging on big time. And that's what happens with the human. We suddenly withdraw the Ritalin or the stimulant, and the brain that's turned the volume way down now suddenly has to turn the volume up. Well, it doesn't do that overnight. It can take weeks to months. So you have to ease that trim off very, very slowly, or you are going to
reduce the dosage.
Reduce the dosage, wean it very carefully and very slowly. And it's going to be rough. That person's going to feel awful for quite some time. And they're going to want to go back to their drug. And you'll go, oh, well, you have an addiction. No, that's actually called a pseudo addiction. You're not really getting high off the drug. You're not driven by an addiction. What you're driven by is you feel so terrible as that drug is withdrawn that you'll start it again to feel normal.
And what can they do holistically to create that drug? Because I'm sure we can do something holistically, whether it's exercise or yoga, as we talked earlier.
Yeah, you're into the non-drug treatment of ADHD, which is a huge topic, and it isn't even my area of expertise. So I have to be very careful that I don't trespass into something that I don't know sufficient about to put into a podcast. But basically, first and foremost, don't accept the diagnosis without a proper assessment. A proper ADHD assessment should take 3 or 4 hours, and preferably should be done by a neuropsychologist. It's not something that should be done in a walk-in clinic. So that's first and foremost. Don't go down that rat hole first if you don't have to. Assuming that you have that diagnosis, then talk about all the non-medication interventions that can be done until you turn to the pill. Sometimes people need that, and the maturing brain won't always need it. So maybe in grade 6, you did need this drug, and you needed it in 7 and 8, but by grade 9 or 10, maybe you don't. And then you slowly wean that drug off under medical supervision and use all of these other behavioral things to help focus or to avoid distraction, whatever your particular flavor of ADHD is. And a psychologist, a child psychologist can advise you, or a learning psychologist can advise on what to do. And you do all that. So it's complicated.
So we talked about ADHD. One of the other drugs that you seem to hear lots of is Ozempic.
Yes, GLP-1.
That's probably becoming very prevalent. Do you see any of that in the aviation industry?
Yeah, we're starting to see that. It raises a much bigger question, which would be of interest to your listeners. What about medication? Like, who decides whether a medication is okay or not okay for a pilot to take? And that's a very complicated thing. The FAA has taken one approach, and Transport Canada has taken pretty much the direct opposite approach. The FAA approach is, okay, we're going to approve each drug and put out a master list. So I continually get pilots who've heard about this approval list say, well, where's the list? Where do I look it up? What's Canada's approved drug list? Well, we don't really have one per se, although there's been some impetus towards creating one. That's an American thing. So what we have instead is a case-by-case basis, which I much prefer. And we look at a drug, any new drug, and we say, does it affect human performance? Is there any side effect or any problem? Or, because you guys are pilots, and we have to think, well, what if you go to the north and you get grounded for a week by weather? What if you suddenly weren't on that drug? What's going to happen then? So you might not be impaired on the drug, but if you suddenly withdrew from it, you'd be impaired. So those are all considerations. So it starts to get complicated. Ozempic so far does not appear to have any impairing problems. People are now using it, of course, for weight loss.
Yeah.
And we've got a number of pilots flying on it. There's some debate about whether it should just be, well, heck, that stuff's like aspirin. It's not a problem. But with any new drug, we watch and see if there are side effects or problems. And so far as I am aware, I have not heard of any. But it is something that should be discussed with your KME, and the KME needs to get the green light from the RAMO before you just go doing it. Because this is the other thing that makes us nuts in the KME world, is somebody will go in and say, guess what? I just started heroin last week. And the response is, you what? Why didn't you ask me before you did that? Because you can't fly on that. And then there's gnashing of teeth and tearing of hair. And oh God, this is so unfair. Come on, you're a pilot. You're smart. You know that. You've got a medical.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to start a prescription medication, the second person you should call after the doctor who prescribed it is your KME. Is
Right.
this okay? And if it isn't okay, what do I do about it?
Does Transport Canada rules, like you already said, that they're different than the FAA rules? What about the EASA or the Asian, like JCAB? Because I flew in Japan for many years.
Right.
If we took an Advil, we had to take 2 days off.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, ostensibly, we're all governed by ICAO. And there's sort of these blanket ICAO. Interesting enough, since we've been talking a lot about addiction, the ICAO stance on addiction is you can't fly with it. It's permanently grounding. It's a permanent disease. We can't cure you. So all of what we've been talking about is flexibility. And all signatory states to ICAO have flexibility where they can go with that rule or they can make it flexible and change it around to work for them.
It's the same thing within the airplane, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so there is a school of thought, which I don't ascribe to and find ridiculous, which is the NASA Mission to Mars school, which says that, unless you are just at or below Olympic caliber international athlete, you can't fly an airplane. Happily, we have something in Canada called human rights. And it says there's something actually called the Meorian test for human rights. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but basically it says you can only be discriminated against if it actually is a bona fide occupational requirement that you have this thing. So for instance, I noticed you're wearing these funny things on your front of your eyes. You can fly an airplane with those. There was a time when you couldn't. But we know that is a disability. You require refractive correction that can be accommodated very easily. So no airline can say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't hire people to wear glasses. That is discrimination under the Human Rights Act because it's not a bona fide occupational requirement that you must be free of glasses. If you were blind, that is a bona fide occupational requirement. The airline could say, I'm sorry, we will not hire you because you are blind.
Yeah, the white cane doesn't go outside the airplane.
Yeah, exactly. So when we see these JAR rules or some of the things that say you have to have an MRI every 5 years, you have to have cardiac catheterization, that's nuts. That's insane. And it's just now we're starting to get into the debate about human rights. Should we have human rights? I think we should. And some people say, no, we shouldn't. Airline pilots should all be NASA astronauts. And if you're not, goodbye. We don't care.
That's what it felt like. My medical was, I think, 3 days in Los Angeles. And then every 6 months, I had to have a chest x-ray. I had to have my eyes tested 6 different ways. And it was a little crazy. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. Couldn't have an Advil. I don't know if it's changed. That was a few years ago.
I don't think it has much. I don't do, that international airline medicine, so I don't know. But I don't think it's changed much.
Well, there you go. Well, there's a lot of areas we could go down here. Services available for pilots who acknowledge substance issues. That would be covered under the aircrew recovery as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just alcohol.
Yeah. Don't try and do it on your own. It's like saying, okay, I'm not going to go to a flight school. I'm just going to go by from the ground up, and I'm going to see if I can design my own syllabus, and I'll see if I know somebody that can teach me how to fly an airplane. You could do it, but it's awfully don't recreate the wheel. We've already got a real nice set of wheels out there. Just rent them.
Yeah, I've had a young lad wanted me to teach him how to fly. I said, well, I could teach how to fly, but guess what? I'm not going to. There's instructors and programs that'll do that.
You're smarter than you look.
Well, it's going back to my earlier comment about fear in aviation. It's like, no, there are people that get paid to do that. I can teach you how to fly a 37, but that's about it. So as far as regulations within Transport Canada, have you noticed a big change over the years being a CAME?
Yeah, for the better, actually, I think. I'm interpreting that question broadly, but we now have these staff instructions. At least tell me what the rules are.
Right.
Before, they were basically making it up as they went. And it all depended if the RAMO liked you or didn't like you. There was a lot of very arbitrary stuff that really couldn't sustain hostile examination. Now I can say to you, right or wrong, here's the staff instruction. Here's the 17 things you're going to do. We can talk about any one of them if you don't like it, but at least we're all working off the same page. So I'm finding that more and more there's better direction for CAMEs. There's better SOPs.
Who designs these?
That's Ottawa.
Ottawa.
That's the main TC. They'll ferry it out to groups of subject matter experts. So, for instance, they'll get 15 cardiologists together, and they'll decide, well, what's the latest evidence on heart attacks? Can we change some of these rules? Can we make it a little easier? Can we get rid of this? Should we add in some things? There's always new tests out there.
How often do they get together to update all these staff instructions?
Not nearly often enough, because they're dead broke. They've got no money, and doing that is very expensive. You've got to get 15 specialists, for instance, in a room at one time, and their deliberations may take many months to come to fruition. So it's quite an expensive undertaking, and they don't have the budget for it. So often I'll see something that hasn't been revisited in 10 years. And 10 years in medicine is like 10 years in aviation. It's a generational difference in how we approach things.
Well, we already talked about just the changes in working conditions that have changed over the years in aviation, and how that probably would affect, obviously, the medical side as well.
Yeah.
Well, before we sign off here, what would you like to let our listeners know, to a new young pilot that wants to get into aviation, or even an old grizzled veteran like myself? What would you like to leave off with?
I think I'd like to leave off with where we started, and that is, I love what you're doing here. I think it's fantastic. We need to be talking. We need to talk. Shame and secrecy is the most potent poison I know for pilot mental well-being. And you're doing something about it. That's terrific. I said it too many times already. Any listener of the podcast, please go look in the mirror. You can rant all you like on the forum about how horrible you think transport is, or this RAMO, or that RAMO, or this rule. You are achieving nothing except more noise, and the world already has enough noise in it. Go look in the mirror and ask, what's my side of the street? What can I do to make it better? And then go talk to some of the people I've been mentioning, and go do some things. We need you. We need your time and your talents.
Yep. Go talk to your peer support people.
Yes.
And if you have any questions, like I said, please send Flying Minds a message, chat@flyingminds.com. And if you have comments on the content that we talked about today, and you want more information on it, let me know, and I will definitely get it to Dr. Adams. And I just want to say thank you very kindly. It's a lot of good information here, and hopefully this does get the conversation started in Canada and in the airlines, and or anybody that's a pilot for that matter. So thank you, and I do hope we can get you on board again.
Well, thanks very much for asking me, and you bet, ask the listeners if there's other stuff they'd want to hear.
Okay.
We can tackle it.
All right. To those aviation enthusiasts out there, keep the greasy side down. We'll talk to you soon.